Nobody warned me that securing a mortgage was the easy part of home ownership. The real nightmare began when the neighborhood dictator decided my backyard fence was an act of treason. He slapped me with $50,000 in fines, threatening to foreclose on my home. He thought he held all the cards, that I was just another resident he could crush under his heel. But he didn't realize I had a lawyer who loved digging through old property records, so I didn't just fight the fine. I bought the very ground his precious clubhouse stood on. Getting the keys to our new house felt like the culmination of a decade of grinding. My wife Claire and I had spent the better part of our 30s living in a cramped, drafty apartment, saving every spare dollar we could scrape together. When we finally closed on a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in the upscale neighborhood of Crestview Estates, it felt like we had finally made it. The lawns were manicured, the streets were lined with mature oak trees, and the community boasted a lavish, newly renovated clubhouse with a private pool and tennis courts. It was picturesque. It was perfect, or so I thought. We hadn't been in the house for more than 48 hours when I first met Gianni Mendoza. I was in the driveway, breaking down cardboard moving boxes and sweating through my t-shirt in the mid-July heat. A gleaming golf cart rolled up to the edge of my driveway, electric motor whining softly, and stopped. Out stepped a man in his late 50s, wearing pristine khaki shorts, a pastel pink polo shirt tucked into a braided leather belt, and a pair of spotless white loafers. He carried a silver clipboard clutched to his chest like a holy relic. "You must be the new owner of Lot 42, he said, not extending a hand. His voice had a reedy, nasal quality to it, the kind of voice that sounded like it was permanently complaining. "To Sean Murray," I said, wiping my sweaty palm on my jeans and offering it to him. He stared at my hand for a brief second before giving it a limp, obligatory shake. "Gianni Mendoza. I am the president of the Crestview Estates Homeowners Association. I see you're getting settled." "Trying to," I chuckled, gesturing to the mountain of flattened boxes. "It's a process." "Indeed," Gianni said, his eyes darting past me to scrutinize the front of my house. "I wanted to personally drop off your welcome packet. It contains the community guidelines, the CC and RS, and the schedule for the neighborhood watch. I highly recommend you read through it immediately. We take our community standards very seriously here, Mr. Murray. For instance, cardboard boxes are not to be left in public view for more than 2 hours prior to the scheduled recycling pickup." I blinked, the smile fading from my face. "Oh, well, I'm just breaking them down right now. I'll put them in the garage." "See that you do," he said, handing me a thick, spiral-bound booklet that looked more like a corporate tax code than a neighborhood welcome packet. "We maintain a harmonious aesthetic at Crestview. We expect all residents to comply. Welcome to the neighborhood." With that, he climbed back into his golf cart and zipped away, leaving me holding the massive rule book. I should have known right then that my life was about to become a living hell. Over the next few months, Claire and I settled into a routine, but Gianni Mendoza was a constant, looming presence. The man treated the neighborhood like his own personal fiefdom. He drove around in his golf cart twice a day, issuing citations for the most absurd infractions. My next-door neighbor, an elderly widower named Mr. Henderson, was fined $50 because his lawn was 1/4 inch above the permissible height. Another neighbor got a warning letter because the shade of their new living room curtains, which could barely be seen from the street, did not comply with the approved neutral color palette. I tried to keep my head down and play by the rules, but we had a problem. Our golden retriever, Barnaby. He was a rescue, full of energy, and he desperately needed a fenced-in backyard to run around in. When we bought the house, the backyard was entirely open, bleeding into a small patch of woods that bordered the community. Knowing Gianni's reputation, I made sure to follow the rules to the letter. I spent 3 weeks reading through the architectural guidelines in the HOA manual. I hired a licensed, bonded contractor. I selected a beautiful 6-foot cedar privacy fence that exactly matched the description of approved materials in Appendix C of the rulebook. I drew up the property lines, attached the contractor's blueprints, and submitted the entire package to the Architectural Review Committee, ARC. which Gianni, of course, chaired. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail with the official Crestview Estates letterhead. It was a formal approval notice signed by Gianni Mendoza himself. The letter stated that my proposed fence met all community standards and that I was cleared to begin construction. Claire and I celebrated that night. We ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and talked about how great it would be to just let Barnaby out the back door without having to walk him on a leash at 6 in the morning. I scheduled the contractor to start the following Monday. I thought I had done everything right. I thought the system worked. I had no idea that I had just walked right into an elaborate trap, one that would nearly cost me my home, my marriage, and my sanity. The construction crew arrived bright and early on a crisp October morning. They worked fast, digging the post holes, pouring the concrete, and setting the beautiful cedar panels into place. By Wednesday afternoon, the fence was nearly complete. It looked fantastic. The wood smelled rich and earthy, and it provided a perfect, secure barrier for our backyard. Barnaby was already running laps around the perimeter, tail wagging furiously. I was standing on the patio, handing out cold bottles of water to the workmen, when the familiar, dreaded whine of the electric golf cart echoed down the street. Gianni Mendoza pulled up onto my front lawn, violating his own rule about motorized vehicles on the grass, and marched into my backyard. His face was a mask of sheer indignation. He wasn't carrying his usual clipboard. This time, he had a brightly colored laser measuring tool and a thick stack of paperwork. "Stop right there. Cease all work immediately," Gianni barked, holding his hand up like a traffic cop. The foreman, a burly guy named Mike, paused with a nail gun in his hand. "Can I help you, buddy?" "I am the HOA president, and I am issuing an immediate stop work order," Gianni announced, his voice vibrating with authority. He turned his glare onto me. "Mr. Murray, what in the world do you think you are doing?" I walked over, utterly confused. "Building the fence, Gianni. The one you approved. I have the signed letter right inside." "The letter?" Gianni sneered. "Approved the concept of a cedar fence. It did not approve this blatant violation of community property lines. You are encroaching on an HOA utility easement." "What easement?" I demanded, my heart starting to pound. "I had a surveyor out here before we started. We are 2 feet inside my property line. We aren't encroaching on anything." Gianni whipped out a crumpled, heavily photocopied map from his stack of papers. According to the revised 2018 Crestview Master Plat, the area bordering the woods is a designated aesthetic transition zone. Any structures must be set back at least 15 feet from the property line. You are at 2 feet. This entire structure is illegal. "That's insane," I shot back. "There was nothing about an aesthetic transition zone in the CC&Rs you gave me, and there was nothing about it when I submitted my blueprints. Blueprints that clearly showed the exact placement of the fence. You signed off on it. The Architectural Review Committee reserves the right to amend approvals if new information comes to light regarding neighborhood compliance," Gianni said smoothly, an oily smile playing on his lips. "You must tear this down immediately. I just paid $8,000 for this fence. I'm not tearing it down." Gianni's eyes narrowed. "Then you will face the consequences, Mr. Murray. As of this moment, you are in violation of Section 4, Paragraph B. You will be fined $100 for every day this illegal structure remains standing. Have a pleasant afternoon." He spun on his heel, marched back to his golf cart, and drove away, leaving me standing in the dirt, completely stunned. I thought he was bluffing. I thought it was just a power trip that would blow over once I presented my case at the next board meeting. I was dead wrong. The very next day, a certified letter arrived. It was an official notice of violation, assessing a $100 fine. The day after that, another letter, $200 total. I immediately requested a hearing with the HOA board. The meeting wasn't scheduled until the end of the month. By the time I walked into the Clubhouse conference room, my fines had already accrued to $2,400. The board meeting was a kangaroo court. Gianni sat at the center of a long mahogany table, flanked by 4 other board members who looked too terrified to even breathe, without his permission. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out my case logically, I presented my property survey, the original CC and Rs, and most importantly, the signed approval letter from Gianni. As you can see, I told the board, keeping my voice calm despite the rage boiling in my chest. I followed every single protocol. The fence is on my property. Mr. Mendoza approved the blueprints. Johnny leaned forward, steepling his fingers. The board has reviewed your documents, Mr. Murray. However, as president, I have the executive authority to rescind ARC approvals if an error was made. Furthermore, our legal counsel has determined that your continued defiance warrants an escalation of penalties. The fines will now double. Double? I choked out. You can't do that. We can, and we have, Gianni said smugly. The fine is now $200 a day. If you do not remove the fence and pay the balance within 90 days, we will place a lien on your property. We have zero tolerance for rule breakers in Crestview. Over the next several months, my life devolved into a waking nightmare. The fine snowballed with terrifying speed. $200 a day became $6,000 a month. Whenever I tried to talk to the other board members, they either ignored me or told me that Gianni handled all legal disputes. Gianni began a campaign of targeted harassment against me. He would sit in his golf cart across the street from my house at 6 in the morning, watching to see if my sprinklers ran a minute too long. He cited me for leaving my trash cans out. He cited me because my front porch light was too bright. By the time spring rolled around, the accumulated fines, late fees, and legal penalties assessed by the HOA's predatory law firm had reached an astronomical, soul-crushing total. $50,000. The stress was destroying us. Claire was in tears almost every night. We had completely depleted our savings paying for the initial fence and the first wave of lawyer fees just to try and get a cease and desist against Gianni, which failed because the CC and Rs gave the HOA nearly unlimited power. The HOA's lawyers sent us a formal notice of intent to foreclose. They were going to take our house. I remember sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, staring at the stack of demand letters, feeling completely broken. Gianni had won. He was going to steal my home over a wooden fence. I needed a miracle. I needed a shark. That's when I found Sage Taylor. Sage Taylor wasn't the kind of lawyer who advertised on highway billboards. She operated out of a cluttered, dusty office in downtown, smelling perpetually of stale coffee and old paper. When I first walked into her office, carrying a binder exploding with HOA notices, she barely looked up from her computer monitor. But as I sat across from her and laid out the timeline, the approval, the sudden reversal, the mysterious, aesthetic transition zone, and the $50,000 in fines, her eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. Was 50 grand over a cedar fence? Sage muttered, flipping through the stack of violation notices. This guy isn't just a tyrant, Deshaun. He's a megalomaniac. The problem with megalomaniacs is they always think they're smarter than the paperwork. The paperwork is airtight, I sighed, running a hand over my exhausted face. Their lawyers are ruthless. The CC and Rs give them the right to foreclose for unpaid fines. I've had 3 other attorneys tell me to just tear down the fence, take out a personal loan, and pay the 50 grand to save my house. Sage scoffed, tossing the CC and R booklet onto her desk. Standard attorneys only look at the rules as they exist today. I look at how the rules were born. To beat an HOA, you don't fight the fines. You fight their jurisdiction. If there's a crack in their foundation, I'll find it. I paid her retainer by maxing out my last credit card. It was a terrifying gamble, but I had no other choice. For 2 weeks, I heard absolutely nothing from Sage. The HOA's foreclosure deadline was looming. Gianni made a point of driving by my house every afternoon, giving me a smug, triumphant wave whenever he saw me checking the mail. I was packing boxes in my living room, preparing for the worst, when my phone finally rang. "Get down to my office. Right now," Sage said. Her voice was buzzing with adrenaline. When I arrived, Sage's desk was entirely covered in massive, blueprint-sized maps, ancient-looking manila folders, and printouts from the county assessor's office. She looked like a mad scientist who had just cracked cold fusion. "I told you megalomaniacs are sloppy," she said, practically bouncing on her heels. I dug into the original establishment of Crestview Estates. It was developed in 1998 by a company called Harrison Holdings. "Right, I saw that name on the deed," I said. "Well, Harrison Holdings went bankrupt in 2003, right before the final phase of the neighborhood was completed," Sage explained, tapping a manicured finger on a large county map. "The HOA assumed control of the community assets. But here is the beautiful, glorious catch. When a developer hands over a neighborhood to an HOA, they are supposed to formally deed the common areas, the parks, the streets, and the clubhouse to the HOA entity." I frowned, trying to follow along. "Okay, and, Sage grinned, pulling out a certified document stamped with the county's seal. Harrison Holdings's bankruptcy was incredibly messy. The lawyers scrambled to liquidate assets. The HOA at the time was poorly organized. The developer transferred almost all the common areas to the Crestview Estates, HOA, almost all." She slammed her finger down on a specific square on the map. "This is Tract B," Sage said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Tract B is a 2-acre parcel of land right in the middle of the neighborhood. The developer never deeded Tract B to the HOA. It fell through the cracks of the bankruptcy. The title remained in the name of a defunct subsidiary of Harrison Holdings." I stared at the map. The square she was pointing to looked awfully familiar. "Wait, what's on Tract B?" Sage let out a sharp laugh. "Tract B is where the HOA built their massive $2 million clubhouse expansion 10 years ago. They built their luxury pool, their tennis courts, and Gianni's precious HOA administrative office on land they do not legally own." The room spun. I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. "Are you serious? They built a clubhouse on land they don't own? How did they get permits?" "Because nobody checked the chain of title that far back," Sage exclaimed. "The county assumed the HOA owned it because it was inside the neighborhood gates. The HOA assumed they owned it because they've been mowing the grass for 20 years. But legally, the Crestview Estates HOA is currently squatting on private property." My mind raced. "So, what does this mean? Can we use this to get the fines dropped?" "Deshawn," Sage said, looking me dead in the eye, her expression entirely serious. "We aren't going to just get the fines dropped. We are going to buy Tract B." I choked on my own saliva. "Buy it? With what money? I'm broke, Sage. I have a $50,000 lien on my house." "Tract B has been accumulating back taxes since 2003, Sage explained rapidly. "The county never noticed because it was buried under a defunct LLC. I just spent the last 3 days tracking down the sole surviving heir of Harrison Holdings. It's a guy named Arthur Pendleton, living in a retirement home in Florida. He had no idea he even owned this parcel. I called him yesterday. I explained the situation and I told him the land has 20 years of unpaid property taxes attached to it." "How much are the taxes?" I asked, terrified. "About $14,000. Arthur doesn't want the liability. He doesn't want to deal with the county. He told me that if you pay him $5,000 cash, he will sign a quitclaim deed transferring the property entirely to you. You pay the $14,000 in back taxes to the county, and you are the sole legal owner of the land underneath the Crestview HOA clubhouse. $19,000. It was a massive sum, but compared to $50,000 and losing my home, it was a lifeline. I called my brother. I begged, pleaded, and borrowed the cash. I pulled from my 401k. Within 48 hours, I had wired the funds to Sage's escrow account. A week later, I sat in Sage's office as a courier delivered the finalized, recorded deed from the county clerk. I held the heavy, stamped paper in my hands. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Congratulations, Mr. Murray." Sage smirked, pouring us both a shot of cheap bourbon from her bottom desk drawer. "You are now the proud owner of a multi-million-dollar clubhouse. Now let's go have a chat with Gianni." The following Tuesday was the monthly Crestview Estates Homeowners Association board meeting. Historically, these meetings were sparsely attended, usually just a handful of disgruntled residents complaining about parking or garbage collection. But word had gotten around that my property was on the chopping block. Johnny Mendoza, in his infinite arrogance, had made sure of it. He wanted a public execution. He wanted the neighborhood to see exactly what happened when you dared to cross him. When Sage and I walked through the double-glass doors of the clubhouse, the room was packed. At least 50 residents were seated in folding chairs, murmuring in hushed, nervous tones. At the front of the room sat the long mahogany table, with Gianni positioned dead center, like a Roman emperor presiding over the Colosseum. Flanking him were the 4 terrified board members and the HOA's notoriously aggressive corporate attorney, a sharp-featured man named Richard Cole. Johnny's eyes locked onto me the second I entered. A sickeningly sweet, triumphant smile spread across his face. He adjusted his pastel pink polo, leaned into his microphone, and called the meeting to order. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a packed agenda tonight," Gianni announced, his nasal voice echoing through the PA system. "But first, we must address an ugly piece of community business. As you all know, maintaining the aesthetic and legal integrity of Crestview Estates is my highest priority. Unfortunately, one resident has repeatedly chosen to flout these rules, resulting in severe financial penalties and, ultimately, the forfeiture of his property." He gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Mr. Murray, the 90-day grace period for your unpaid fines has expired. The total balance is $50,000. The board has authorized Mr. Cole to file the foreclosure paperwork tomorrow morning. Unless you have a cashier's check for the full amount right now, you have nothing left to say here. Please sit down, or I will have security remove you." The room went dead silent. A few of my neighbors looked at me with genuine pity. Mr. Henderson, the elderly widower who had been fined over his grass height, shook his head sadly. I didn't sit down. I didn't say a word. I just stepped back and let Sage walk forward. She marched up the center aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She was carrying a single, slender manila folder. She stopped about 3 feet from the board's table, radiating absolute, unshakable confidence. "Mr. Mendoza, my name is Sage Taylor. I am legal counsel for Mr. Deshaun Murray," she began, her voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. "We are not here to pay your extortionate fines. We are here to serve notice." Johnny scoffed, rolling his eyes at his attorney. "Notice of what? A lawsuit? Get in line, Ms. Taylor. Your client is bankrupt, and our CC and Rs strictly prohibit residents from suing the board for enforcing architectural guidelines. Richard, tell her." Richard Cole leaned forward, looking bored. "Counselor, if you're trying to file a temporary restraining order against the foreclosure, you're wasting your time. The debt is valid. The lien is recorded. You have no legal standing to halt the process." "I'm not here to halt a foreclosure on my client's home," Sage said, a wicked, razor-sharp smile cutting across her face. "I'm here to halt your illegal occupation of my client's property." Gianni frowned, his smug facade cracking just a fraction. "What in the world are you talking about?" Sage opened the manila folder. She didn't hand the document to Gianni. She bypassed him entirely and handed it directly to Richard Cole. "What you are holding, Mr. Cole, is a certified, recorded quitclaim deed from the county clerk's office," Sage explained, her voice ringing out so every single resident in the room could hear her. "It proves that my client, Deshaun Murray, is the sole and exclusive owner of Tract B. For those of you unfamiliar with the original developer's plat, Tract B is a 2-acre parcel of land right in the middle of Crestview Estates." She paused, letting the silence stretch out for maximum dramatic effect. "Specifically, it is the 2 acres of land sitting directly underneath this $2 million clubhouse, the community pool, and the tennis courts. The developer never deeded this land to the HOA. It was abandoned in a 2003 bankruptcy. My client tracked down the rightful owner, paid the back taxes, and purchased the property outright." Johnny's face turned the color of spoiled milk. He let out a loud, forced laugh, but it sounded completely unhinged. That is absurd. That is a fabrication. The HOA has owned this building for 20 years. Richard, tell her she's insane. But Richard Cole wasn't looking at Sage. He was staring at the deed in his hands. All the color had drained from the attorney's face. His eyes were wide, darting frantically over the county's seals, the signatures, and the parcel identification numbers. He flipped to the second page, his hands physically trembling. "Richard," Gianni demanded, his voice cracking. "Throw them out." Richard slowly lowered the paper to the table. He didn't look at Gianni. He looked at Sage, recognizing a fellow predator who had just outmaneuvered him completely. "Johnny," Richard whispered, his voice completely devoid of its usual arrogance. "The parcel number. It matches the county database. The seal is authentic. This deed was recorded 3 days ago." "So what?" Gianni yelled, slamming his fists on the table. "We built the clubhouse. We maintain it. We have squatters' rights, adverse possession, whatever you want to call it." Adverse possession against a defunct corporate entity that technically held a municipal tax lien requires a quiet title action that the HOA never filed. Sage countered instantly, firing off the legal jargon like bullets. "You didn't file it because you didn't know you were squatting. You built a $2 million structure on land you do not own. In this state, improvements built on private land without a lease agreement belong to the owner of the land." The crowd of residents erupted. People were gasping, whispering furiously, and pointing at Gianni. Mr. Henderson let out a loud, genuine bark of laughter. "What does this mean?" one of the terrified board members squeaked, looking at the lawyer. "It means," Richard Cole said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, "that the Crestview Estates HOA does not own this clubhouse. Mr. Murray does." I finally stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Sage. I looked down at Gianni, who was visibly hyperventilating, his hands gripping the edges of the mahogany table as if the floor was dropping out from underneath him. "Here are my terms, Gianni," I said, keeping my voice dead calm. "We'll see you of 24 hours to wipe the $50,000 balance from my account, remove the lien on my house, and issue a formal, written apology. Furthermore, I am dissolving the architectural guidelines regarding my backyard. My fence stays." "You can't do this," Gianni shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. "I am the president. I will tie you up in litigation for a decade. I will bankrupt you." "If you attempt to foreclose on my home," I replied, leaning in close so he could see the absolute conviction in my eyes, "I will have you and this entire board arrested for trespassing on my private property. I will bulldoze this clubhouse, fill the pool with concrete, and turn this 2-acre lot into a giant, fenced-in dog park for Barnaby. Do not test me." I turned my back on him and walked down the center aisle. The residents parted for me, a few of them actually clapping. Sage followed closely behind, leaving the HOA board in a state of absolute, total devastation. We had dropped a nuclear bomb on Gianni Mendoza's little empire, and the fallout was going to be spectacular. I thought Gianni would instantly cave. I thought the sheer, overwhelming reality of his legal peril would force him to drop the fines and beg for mercy. But I had underestimated the depth of his delusion. Megalomaniacs don't surrender. They double down. The next morning I woke up to an email from Richard Cole, the HOA's attorney. To Deshaun Murray, Sage Taylor, from Richard Cole, Esquire. "Mr. Murray, President Mendoza and the HOA board refuse your demands. The board asserts that they retain equitable interest in the clubhouse property due to a history of maintenance and development. We are filing an emergency injunction to block your claim to Track B. The foreclosure proceedings on your home will continue as scheduled. Any attempt to interfere with HOA operations at the clubhouse will be met with immediate police action." I stared at my phone, the blood rushing in my ears. He was actually going to fight me. He was going to use HOA funds, our neighborhood dues, to wage a legal war against me for a building they didn't even own. I forwarded the email to Sage. She called me less than a minute later. "Equitable interest?" Sage laughed, the sound sharp and metallic. "Say, they're grasping at straws. They can file whatever injunction they want, but right now, today, you are the legal owner of that property on the county register, and as the legal owner, you have the right to secure your premises." "So what do we do?" I asked, adrenaline starting to pump through my veins. "We become landlords," she said. "Meet me at the clubhouse in an hour. Bring heavy-duty padlocks, a thick metal chain, and your dog." An hour later, my truck pulled up to the curb outside the Crestview clubhouse. The morning air was cool, the neighborhood quiet. Barnaby was in the back seat, whining with excitement. Sage was already there, standing next to a burly guy holding a massive toolbox, a commercial locksmith she had on speed dial. "Let's get to work," she said. We walked up to the main double doors of the clubhouse. Sage handed the locksmith a copy of the deed and my driver's license to verify ownership. He shrugged, pulled out a heavy drill, and went to work on the master locks. Within 10 minutes, the brass cylinders were hollowed out, and brand new, heavy-duty deadbolts were installed. I was the only person in the world with the keys. We didn't stop there. We chained the gates to the tennis courts. We padlocked the mechanical room for the community pool. Every single access point was secured. Then came the pièce de résistance, Gianni's pristine electric golf cart, the one he used to terrorize the neighborhood, was parked in its usual spot right next to the front doors of the clubhouse, plugged into a wall charger. Technically, Sage noted, tapping her chin, that vehicle is parked illegally on private commercial property without the owner's consent. I smiled. I called a local towing company. Because I had the deed to the land, the tow truck driver had zero hesitation. He backed his rig up, hooked the winch to the front axle of Gianni's beloved golf cart, and hauled it away to an impound lot on the other side of town. Finally, I pulled out a stack of laminated papers Sage and I had drafted the night before. I used a staple gun to attach them to the front doors, the pool gates, and the community bulletin board. Notice of trespass and commercial lease terms. This property, Tract B, Crestview Estates, is privately owned by Deshaun Murray. It is no longer under the jurisdiction or control of the Crestview Estates, HOA. Effective immediately, all access by HOA board members is strictly prohibited. Any unauthorized entry will result in criminal trespassing charges. If the Crestview Estates, HOA, wishes to lease this commercial space for administrative operations, the monthly rent is $150,000, payable in advance. A late fee of $5,000 per day will be assessed for any delayed payments. The landlord reserves the right to enforce aesthetic standards, including, but not limited to, banning pastel clothing on the premises and requiring all board members to park off-site. It was petty. It was vindictive. It was exactly what Gianni had done to me, magnified by 1,000. I took Barnaby out of the truck, unclipped his leash, and let him run wild across the pristine, manicured lawn of the clubhouse. He was having the time of his life. We didn't have to wait long for the fireworks. At 8:30 a.m., Gianni Mendoza drove up in his personal car, a spotless silver Mercedes. He parked in his designated HOA president-only spot and marched toward the front doors, carrying his briefcase and a massive Yeti thermos of coffee. He didn't notice the new locks at first. He just jammed his key into the door, only to find it wouldn't turn. He yanked on the handle. Nothing. He stepped back, confused, and that was when he saw the laminated notice stapled right at eye level. I watched from the patio of the pool area, sitting in a lounge chair with Barnaby at my feet. Gianni read the notice. His face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: confusion, disbelief, outrage, and finally, a deep, purple rage. He spun around, looking frantically for his golf cart. When he realized it was missing, he practically screamed. "Murray!" he roared, spotting me sitting by the pool. He rushed the iron gates, grabbing the bars and shaking them furiously. The new chains held firm. "What have you done? Where is my cart?" "It was illegally parked on my property, Gianni," I called back, taking a sip from a bottle of water. "I had it towed. The impound fee is probably around $300. Make sure you don't use HOA funds to pay for it. That would be embezzlement." "You arrogant little punk," he spat, his eyes bulging. "I'm calling the police. I'm having you arrested for breaking and entering." He whipped out his phone and dialed 911, his fingers trembling with fury. He paced back and forth, screaming at the dispatcher that a maniac had hijacked the community center. 10 minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled up, lights flashing but no sirens. 2 patrol officers stepped out, looking incredibly bored. Gianni immediately rushed them, pointing frantically at me. "Arrest him! He changed the locks. He stole my vehicle. He is trespassing on HOA property," Gianni demanded. The older of the 2 cops, a sergeant with a graying mustache, walked up to the iron gate. "Sir, step away from the gate. You inside. Can you come out here and explain what's going on?" I stood up, leashed Barnaby, and walked over to the gates. I unlocked the heavy padlock, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and handed the sergeant my manila folder. "Good morning, officers," I said politely. "My name is Deshaun Murray. Here is my driver's license, and here is your certified original copy of the county deed proving that I am the sole owner of this property. This man, Mr. Mendoza, is an aggrieved former occupant who is currently trespassing on my land." The sergeant took the deed, his eyes scanning the raised county seal and my name. He looked at the laminated notice on the door, then looked at Gianni, who was practically vibrating with rage. "This is a fake," Gianni yelled. "He's a liar. The HOA owns this building." "Sir, calm down," the sergeant ordered, handing the deed back to me. "This document is stamped and recorded. If you have a dispute over the title, that is a civil matter for the courts. As of right now, legally, he owns this lot. He has the right to change the locks." "No, he stole my golf cart," Gianni screeched. "I didn't steal it," I corrected him. "I had it impounded from my private property. I can give him the address of the tow yard." The sergeant sighed, looking exhausted by the suburban drama. He turned to Gianni. "Mr. Mendoza, you need to leave the premises. If Mr. Murray asks you to leave his property, and you refuse, I will have to arrest you for criminal trespassing." "You can't be serious," Gianni gasped, clutching his chest as if he'd been shot. "I am the president of Crestview Estates, and I'm a police officer telling you to step off the grass," the sergeant replied firmly, resting his hand on his duty belt. "Walk to your car, sir, now." Gianni looked at the cops. He looked at me. He looked at the heavily chained clubhouse doors. The reality of his absolute powerlessness finally seemed to penetrate his thick skull. His jaw trembled, and for a second, I thought he was going to cry. Instead, he turned around, marched to his Mercedes in total silence, and drove away. I had won the battle. I had taken his fortress, but as I watched his car disappear down the street, I knew the war was far from over. Gianni was going to use every dirty trick and every dollar in the HOA's bank account to destroy me, and I needed to be ready to break him completely. Word of the clubhouse seizure spread through Crestview Estates, like a wildfire fueled by pure, unadulterated neighborhood gossip. By noon that same day, my cell phone was blowing up with texts from numbers I didn't even recognize. People were walking their dogs past the clubhouse just to stare at the heavy metal chains wrapped around the front doors and the laminated eviction notice stapled to the wood. Gianni, true to his vindictive nature, did exactly what Richard Cole promised. He filed an emergency injunction in county court, demanding a judge force me to hand over the keys while the ownership of Tract B was litigated. It was a desperate, expensive Hail Mary. 2 days later, Sage and I walked into the county courthouse for the injunction hearing. Gianni was there, wearing a severe charcoal suit, looking completely exhausted. The bags under his eyes were dark purple, and his usual air of arrogant superiority had been replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. Richard Cole sat beside him, looking like a man who knew he was steering a sinking ship. The judge, an older, no-nonsense woman named Honorable Judge Davies, had zero patience for HOA drama. She read through the injunction request, looked at my certified deed, and then peered over her reading glasses at Richard Cole. "Counselor," Judge Davies said, her voice dripping with skepticism, "let me make sure I understand the plaintiff's argument. Your client, the HOA, failed to secure the deed to a 2-acre commercial parcel for 20 years. Mr. Murray legally purchased the parcel, paid the delinquent municipal taxes, and possesses a recorded quitclaim deed. And you want me to issue an injunction stripping him of his property rights because your client accidentally built a swimming pool on land they don't own. Your Honor, the HOA has a prescriptive easement and equitable interest," Richard argued. though his voice lacked conviction. My client has maintained the property for 2 decades. Maintenance does not override a recorded deed in this jurisdiction, Mr. Cole. Judge Davies snapped. Ignorance of property lines is not a legal defense. Injunction denied. Mr. Murray is the lawful owner of Tract B. If your client steps foot on that property without his permission, I will personally sign the arrest warrants. Case dismissed. Sage let out a soft, triumphant laugh. Gianni looked as if he was going to vomit. But the legal victory was only the beginning. The real battle was happening back in the neighborhood. Summer was approaching, and the temperatures were already climbing into the high 80s. The residents of Crestview Estates paid nearly $300 a month in HOA dues, primarily to maintain and access the luxurious clubhouse pool. And right now, that pool was chained shut. Gianni sent out a frantic community-wide email claiming that a rogue resident had hijacked the facilities and that the board was taking immediate legal action to restore order. He assured everyone that the pool would be open by the weekend. He lied. Friday rolled around and the chains remained firmly in place. I decided it was time to win the hearts and minds of the neighborhood. I printed out 200 flyers and spent the evening walking from door to door, stuffing them into mailboxes. The flyer was simple and devastatingly effective. It read, "To my neighbors in Crestview Estates, by now you know the clubhouse and pool are closed. The HOA board, led by Gianni Mendoza, built our community center on private land they never legally owned. I recently purchased that land to save my own home from an illegal foreclosure initiated by Gianni over a backyard fence. I do not want to punish the neighborhood for Gianni's incompetence. Therefore, tomorrow at noon, I am unlocking the pool for a community barbecue. Hot dogs and burgers are on me. Everyone is welcome to use the facilities, free of charge. However, Gianni Mendoza and the current HOA board members are strictly banned from entering my private property. If you want a functional community, it is time to ask where your HOA dues are really going." The turnout was spectacular. By 1 o'clock on Saturday, the pool deck was packed. Kids were splashing in the water, neighbors were lounging in the sun, and I was manning a massive charcoal grill, handing out burgers. The atmosphere was electric. People weren't just happy to be at the pool, they were thrilled to see Gianni taking down a peg. Mr. Henderson, my elderly neighbor, walked up to the grill and handed me a cold beer. "Deshaun, my boy," he chuckled, his eyes crinkling with amusement. In 30 years of living in suburbs, I have never seen a man establish his own sovereign nation inside an HOA. You are an absolute legend. "Just trying to keep my house, Arthur," I smiled, clinking my bottle against his. "Well, you've done more than that," he said, lowering his voice. "People are talking. Gianni has spent over $20,000 of our community reserve funds this week alone on attorney fees trying to fight you. And now he's talking about levying a special assessment on all homeowners to fund a prolonged lawsuit against you." My jaw tightened. A special assessment? He's going to tax the neighborhood to pay his lawyer. He has the authority to do it under the bylaws, Mr. Henderson nodded grimly. Unless, of course, the board is recalled. That was the spark I needed. I spent the rest of the afternoon talking to every single resident at the barbecue. I explained the situation, the $50,000 fine over a fence, the predatory foreclosure attempt, and Gianni's insane legal spending. I had Sage draft a petition for an emergency recall election to remove Gianni and the entire board from power. By the time the sun went down, I had 75 signatures. We only needed 50 to force a mandatory vote. But Sage wasn't done digging. While I was rallying the neighborhood, she was doing what she did best, following the money. On Monday morning, she called me into her office. She had a thick stack of financial records that she had subpoenaed from the HOA's property management company during our countersuit for harassment. "Gianni is a dead man walking," Sage said, slapping a ledger onto her desk. I started looking into the vendor contracts for Crestview Estates. Guess who owns Pristine Greenery, the landscaping company that has an exclusive no-bid contract to mow the lawns and trim the hedges in the common areas? I don't know. Gianni. Close. His brother-in-law, Sage smirked. and pristine greenery charges the HOA 40% above the market rate for commercial landscaping. Over the last 5 years, Gianni has funneled roughly $200,000 of neighborhood dues directly into his family's pockets. It's blatant embezzlement, disguised as inflated vendor invoices. I stared at the ledger, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. He's going to prison. Maybe, Sage said. But more importantly, he's lost his leverage. He thought he could crush you with debt. Now we hold his entire life in our hands. It's time to end this. We didn't wait for the recall election. We forced the issue. Sage contacted Richard Cole, the HOA attorney, and requested an immediate emergency settlement conference. She hinted that we had uncovered financial irregularities regarding the vendor contracts and that we were preparing to forward our findings to the county district attorney's office for criminal investigation. The response was instantaneous. We met the following evening in the very conference room of the clubhouse that I now legally owned. I unlocked the doors specifically for this meeting. The air conditioning was off, leaving the room stiflingly warm, a physical reminder of who controlled the building. Johnny walked in looking like a ghost. His pristine polo was wrinkled, his posture was slumped, and his hands shook slightly as he pulled out a chair. The other 4 board members looked absolutely terrified. Richard Cole sat at the far end of the table, his arms crossed, looking at Gianni with open disgust. It was clear the lawyer had reviewed the landscaping ledgers and realized his client was a massive liability. "Let's make this quick," Sage said, not bothering to sit down. She tossed a manila envelope onto the center of the table. Inside that envelope are the financial records detailing Mr. Mendoza's fraudulent funneling of HOA funds to his brother-in-law's landscaping company. It is fraud, it is a breach of fiduciary duty, and it is highly illegal. The 4 board members gasped, turning to look at Gianni in horror. "Gianni, is this true?" asked Brenda, the board secretary, her voice shrill with panic. "It's a misrepresentation," Gianni stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. The prices were competitive. I was acting in the best interest of the community." "Save it for the judge, Gianni," I cut in, my voice hard and unforgiving. "You tried to steal my house over a wooden fence. You harassed my wife. You made my life a living hell for 8 months because you wanted to feel powerful. Well, you don't have any power anymore." I placed a single, typed sheet of paper on the table. "These are my terms for settlement, non-negotiable," I announced. I read them aloud, enjoying every single second of Gianni's agonizing defeat. 1. The $50,000 fine assessed against my property is immediately voided. The lien on my home is removed tomorrow morning. 2. The Crestview Estates HOA will reimburse me for all my legal fees and the $19,000 I spent purchasing this land. That check will be cut from the reserve fund tomorrow. 3. The architectural guidelines regarding fences are permanently amended. My cedar fence stays exactly where it is, forever. 4. Gianni Mendoza will immediately resign as HOA president, and he will sell his home and move out of Crestview Estates within 90 days. If he does not, my attorney will hand the embezzlement file to the district attorney, and you will all be named as co-conspirators in a civil racketeering lawsuit. The room was deathly quiet. "And what about the clubhouse?" Richard Cole finally asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "What happens to Track B?" "I don't want to manage a community center," I said truthfully. "Once the new Gianni Free Board is elected, I will sign a 99-year lease, granting the HOA full use of the clubhouse, the pool, and the tennis courts." "A fee? For how much?" Brenda asked nervously. I smiled. $1 a year, provided the board leaves me, my wife, and my dog alone for the rest of our lives. The 4 board members didn't even hesitate. They practically tripped over each other to agree. They drafted Gianni's resignation letter right there on a piece of legal pad paper and forced him to sign it. Watching Gianni Mendoza sign away his kingdom was the most cathartic moment of my life. His hands shook so violently he could barely hold the pen. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. He just scrawled his name, stood up, and walked out of the clubhouse. He looked small, broken, and utterly defeated. The aftermath was swift and brutal for him. stripped of his power and facing the wrath of a neighborhood that now knew he had been stealing from them. Johnny put his house on the market 3 days later. It sold below asking price. He moved out in the dead of night, too ashamed to show his face to the neighbors he had terrorized for so long. The HOA forced him to repay the embezzled funds from the sale of his home to avoid criminal charges. As for Crestview Estates, the atmosphere shifted overnight. With the tyrant gone, the neighborhood finally felt like a community. The new board, headed by Mr. Henderson, was relaxed and entirely reasonable. They changed the CC&Rs to be forgiving rather than punitive. People started talking to each other again. Kids rode their bikes on the grass without fear of being yelled at by a man in a golf cart. My home was safe. My marriage was stronger than ever. And I had pulled off the greatest legal heist in suburban history. On a warm evening in late summer, Claire and I sat on our back patio, sipping glasses of wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Behind us, Barnaby was happily chewing on a tennis ball, safely contained within the beautiful, sturdy, and completely legal 6-foot cedar fence. We had fought the system, found the flaw, and bought the ground right out from under them. It was a hell of a battle, but as I looked out over my backyard, I knew it had been worth every single penny. If you thought the drama ended there, you are absolutely mistaken. What happened next broke the HOA, completely shattered Gianni's ego, and gave me the ultimate revenge that every homeowner dreams about. I evicted the HOA from their own building, but the way I did it will leave you speechless. If you want to hear the epic conclusion of how I turned the tables on this tyrant and made him beg for mercy, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who hates their HOA.